you ready for my all-time #1 in-demand item for canning and cooking that I can grow in my garden? It is, drum roll, no, not really, but it is marinara sauce and pizza sauce. It is the same base for either one of them, and it just depends on how long you cook it down. So here is marinara. I can it in 32-ounce jars. The sauce itself it's actually less dense than straight water. It comes in at about 29 ounces. And that may also be partially due to the head space. That's what that space is between the lid and the fluid in the jar. So 29 weight ounces for a 32 fluid ounce jar. This is marinara sauce. See how you can tell there's substance to it, but it does move freely because I took it to a sauce consistency. Whereas pizza sauce, it's not quite tomato paste, but it's definitely much thicker than the marinara. Now, I have definitely used marinara sauce on my pizzas, and I have added water to pizza sauce to make pasta sauce. It works, it's the same seasoning blend, but you can prepare and preserve them in this state versus this state for ease of use. Now, I live in a temperate climate, and so I grow these tomatoes during the summer, and they have a specific season, and my time is consumed preserving them so that I have tomatoes to last through the year. Tomatoes are super cool fruits in that they really do not lose their nutrition superpowers when you cook them. And get this, now most people have heard about lycopene, which is what gives the tomatoes their color. It has been linked specifically with conditions such as prostate cancer. But, beyond the standard phytonutrients and fiber and all the other good stuff that all your fruits and vegetables have, the actual little seed parts of tomatoes and also the skins have, it's considered, it reduces platelet activity. So it helps prevent your platelets from creating clots in your blood vessels, and it can actually help clear out your arteries and your veins, which is very cool. That's tomato seeds. And it does not actually thin the blood, interestingly enough. They tested that, they who have the cool labs and the science. So the traditional way to make pasta sauce or any type of tomato sauce, would take this many tomatoes, which is right at 33 pounds. And that's just what I happen to have ripe today. And you can see I collected all different varieties of tomatoes. But regardless of what type of tomato you start with, the traditional way to do it is you would blanch your tomatoes, peel them, and then run them through a food mill to remove the seeds, because you don't want the seeds in your sauce. Well, I actually want the seeds in my sauce, so we're gonna just change several of the steps in traditional pasta sauce making. I know, but we're gonna do it for efficiency as well as super nutrition, because I want to keep the skins and the seeds. Instead of using a food mill and blanching and skinning and losing over 20% of your tomato by weight, we are going to use the highest powered blender you can get your hands on and run everything through there. So we end up with a smooth sauce that we can later add chunky stuff to if we want to, when we're ready to cook it, or a smooth but thick pizza sauce. So that means, because we're blending it, we can use whatever types of tomatoes we want, including cherry tomatoes, which if you're trying to blanch them and then peel them, they are a lot of work. But if you're just popping them in the blender, they're fabulous. So off we go. And I also have, I've got some pink tomatoes. I've got some Mr. Stripey tomatoes. You can see this is fully ripe and it's got a little bit of a yellow and a pink tint to it. I've got the cherry tomatoes that I mentioned before, some conventional style canning tomatoes. See, some of the plum tomatoes. Let's see, what else do we have? I've got all kinds, and I even have some, because I do not spray my tomatoes with anything other than neem oil. I've got some ugly tomatoes. Yeah, we don't want that particular spot, but we can use the whole rest of the good tomato, and this one got gouged while I was moving them around. So we can actually cut those icky spots out and they will make fabulous sauce, because otherwise this is a ripe, beautiful Mr. Stripey tomato. So this sauce, very efficient, very cost effective. We are going to then take our lovely tomatoes. As we blend them, we're going to be adding a variety of seasonings to them. These would be considered, for the most part, herbs, but also some spices, seeing as we have black pepper. And then during the cooking process, we will add our bay leaves. But we're going to add, as I walk you through this, the step is essentially we clean all of our produce, which I have already done, and then we're going to be blending it and adding it to the pot, and then the next step is cooking it. And you cook it for a while with this one to get to what you're doing is basically evaporating water out of it and concentrating the flavor. But you're gonna cook it for an even longer while to get to here. See how it's so much thicker? It's got more flavor per square inch and a lot less water per square inch. Actually, cubic inch. Okay, so let's get this started. Let's see. I just need a spot to put my lid. That's fine. So I have a tomato knife, if you're not familiar with them. It's a serrated blade, but most of them actually have a handy dandy little pointed tip. I'm going to leave the cores in my tomatoes. Let's start with a pretty tomato. This one's pretty. Got one little not as nice spot. I'm gonna get rid of that spot. I keep a bowl handy for my compost. See how juicy this is? That is what would make it a ripe tomato. I just want to make it smaller chunks. They don't have to be pretty chunks. For my blender. So I'm going to add, I put a little bit of tomato in the bottom. The first seasoning I'm adding, this is dehydrated chopped onion. This is roughly a cup and a half of it. And that's gonna be a little bit to taste. I prefer, when I'm canning tomato sauce, to use dehydrated onion as well as granulated dehydrated garlic. And that is because it absorbs some of the moisture. One second, I gotta turn the timer off for a different project. Okay, so the dehydrated garlic and dehydrated onion soak up some of the tomato juice, so it actually reduces how long you have to cook it by just a little bit. So back we are to chop. I'm gonna get an ugly tomato. See, this one actually got a sunburn. That's what causes the split right there. That serrated edge lets me be very precise. You see how juicy that thing is? It's not bad. It is just so super ripe. And it's going in. So apparently for the heart healthy and artery healthy benefits, it is that gooey stuff around the seeds that is so interesting for the reduction of, I would call it, extra platelet activity. All right, this one looks like something got in there, so there's gonna be a bad spot on the tomato, but that's okay. We'll say goodbye to the bad spot. Now, for my gardening purposes, some people are very particular about what variety of tomato they plant. My goal is to plant a variety versus one specific variety, because I find even though I haven't moved, the weather is not always the same from year to year, and some varieties do better than others. And to me, it's a way of kind of hedging my bet. See how I was able to just put the cherry tomatoes in whole? So easy. So if you have someone that grew cherry tomatoes, or you grew cherry tomatoes and you just don't even know what to do with them, make sauce. Absolutely fantastic. All right, I'm gonna get this big tomato in and we will have our first blender batch. And I am not bothering to core the tomatoes unless it's got completely sunburnt and split and really tough. But this is all very edible, and I am a big fan of waste not, want not. It does not impact the flavor of your sauce, and you're gonna be blending it up so much you won't be able to see it. So I say use it. All right. So, for my particular blender, my lid is in. I have a tamper in. Not all blenders have that. This one just does. I'm going to turn it on, start at a low speed, and then you increase the speed, because the faster your blender rotates, the finer the chop. So I want to get this really fine. I want those tomato seeds to basically disappear. And I want the skin to not be left as little pieces and flakes in there. I want it to be, you know, sauce. All right, so here we go. It's gonna get loud. Okay. Now, a blender for me is an essential kitchen tool. I use mine several times a day, and I did end up investing in a professional grade blender because I was killing all of the other ones. But if you don't cook as much, just get it whatever blender you can afford and try it. There's no need to start at the top of the line if you're not going to use it all the time. Okay, this one, funky spot, so I'm just going to get rid of that one funky spot. So we've done our onions. The other flavor that is so quintessential for Italian cooking, we must have our garlic. For this, I did 2 tablespoons of garlic, and you can adjust that to your taste buds. I like a lot of garlic. Excellent for your immune system. So what's not to love, right? Okay, so we'll keep going with our tomatoes. This one, in half. This one, I might quarter. And you don't even have to split them the whole way up. It's like, it just gives it the blender a start. See, this one, if you grow tomatoes or if you're at a farmer's market, this is okay. This simply means it got too much sun, like maybe too many of the leaves had died off near it. So it got a little sunburned as it ripened and the skin split. He's still fine. It's just a little bit more susceptible to other things once that skin splits. All right, and that was a pink. See, this is really super ripe and juicy. I can't share the feel through video, but I guess you can see the juice coming off of it. This is a super ripe tomato. So again, not all your tomatoes are gonna be deep red when they're ripe. So really, I'm gonna test a tomato by feel, and it gives slightly when I push my fingers in it. Like, you can feel the juice inside of it. It's not squishy like a bad tomato. Like, this is a bad spot, and you can actually see the liquid underneath the skin. That's gonna be gross, and it's actually gonna be stinky right here if I pop that like a blister. So what I'm gonna do with this one, number one, I'm gonna remove the stems. Now, I have read varying things about the stems with tomatoes. Some chefs will actually leave the stems in for enhanced flavor. However, I prefer adding something like parsley because the stems and leaves of tomato plants have the highest concentrations of the chemical that makes them a nightshade and can make them very difficult for some people to handle food-wise. The chemical that makes them a nightshade is actually poisonous in super high concentrations. So I get rid of, it's in the tomato plant itself, it's at its lowest concentration in the fruit. It's like almost non-existent, but in the stems and leaves, that's where it concentrates for that particular plant. So I stick with the fruits and go ahead and compost all my stems and leaves. And then for this ugly spot, I'm going to go a little bit inside from it, because when they look like this, sometimes those boo-boos go deep. And in, see, the rest of the tomato was beautiful. Look at that. Isn't that pretty? Yay! I enjoy celebrating the fruit. See, now this one had a little bit of sunburn at the top. That's all sunburn right there. It's gonna be just fine for our purposes. And this is another Mr. Stripey, or it might be a pink one. Sometimes it's hard to tell. And quite frankly, they're all gonna make delicious sauce, so now, if you're just slicing tomatoes, it's fun to have, and know which variety you have, and you can see the stripes when you slice it. But if you have excess tomatoes and you or people that you have over or your family likes things like pizza and spaghetti sauce, it can all go in. It'll save you a bunch of money. All right, so we have the garlic in this round. We're gonna do the same thing we did last time. Powering it on and then speeding it up. And yes, 33 pounds of tomatoes that's a lot. And if you're buying tomatoes, yes, it does take that much to make sauce. you're gonna be cooking it and cooking it and cooking it and evaporating it. So next, and that's what they do when you get commercial sauce. Now, next, let's add some basil. This is fresh basil because my basil is ripe right around the same time as my tomatoes. You can use the dry basil to taste. For 33 pounds of tomatoes, I would do at least a teaspoon of dried basil. So I'm gonna put this back so I have more room to work. And let's get, ooh, icky spot. Here we go. And we're in business on that tomato. Now, as I find tomato plants that do particularly well, I will go ahead and save some of the seeds as it gets to the end of the season so I can grow them again next year. But again, I like to have a few different varieties. I have not found the perfect tomato. I find they all have different strengths and can vary from year to year. So this one, look, it was so ripe, just the weight of the other tomatoes made it split. Let's get that in the sauce. That's perfect. There we go. This one conventionally would not be a good candidate for canning because of the funny shape, and also it's a pink tomato. But in our sauce, it's gonna be fantastic. Never fear. All right, batch number 3. And here we go. And it just fills it up little by little. Now 33 pounds of tomatoes is not going to fill this 24 quart pot to the brim. And yes, it is a big commercial cooking pot. However, I like this size even if I'm not filling it to the brim because it has a larger surface area inside the pot for the water to evaporate out, which actually speeds up the cooking process a little bit. So 24 quart pot, 33 pounds, it's gonna fill it to, you can see right around where I normally fill this pot to, right around there. And you do not really want to go above that because once you bring this sauce to a boil, it's much like jam. If you've made any jam, it'll get a foam when it comes to a boil, and that foam can get very close to the top if you don't allow more, like at least 3.5 inches of headspace. Okay, so next on my spice list, let's do the oregano. All right. If I were not running it through a high power blender, I would go ahead and remove the leaves from the stem and compost the stem. However, I'm running this through a high power blender, so I'm just gonna use the whole thing. Oregano, you hear about your leafy greens for antioxidants and the cancer fighting vitamin A, all that good stuff. Oregano actually beats most of your leafy greens. It's just we consider it an herb rather than straight food. So anytime you can add a little bit of extra oregano to your food, I say do it. It's always a good way to sneak in some nutrition. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put the oregano in there and put tomatoes on top of it. Again, doing each of these seasoning ingredients with the tomatoes because it adds liquid. Oh look, see I had cherry tomatoes, and look, I even grew some grape tomatoes this year. And they're gonna be great in the sauce. And this varies from person to person. Some people really love fresh raw tomatoes, but a lot more people, even if they don't like raw tomatoes, love things like spaghetti sauce and pizza sauce. And my family definitely contains more of that category than the fresh tomato eaters. So I don't have to compete too much with snackers when it comes to my tomatoes. Everyone's, for the most part, pretty happy to let them ripen for things like salsa and marinara, pizza sauce, barbecue sauce, even tomato paste. Let's see. But again, that may be an entirely different story in your household. Okay, a little bit more for this batch. That one's actually okay. Okay. Oh, look how pretty that one. I was unsure. Look how pretty and red that one. So it's a little bit wrinkled on the outside. So it looks like it got maybe slightly dehydrated. But look at that beautiful ripe inside. That's perfect. All right. Next one. So as you can tell, I mean, your seasoning profile for your tomatoes is somewhat up to you, but for traditional Italian, you should be thinking garlic. I like the onion in it as well as the basil that we put in, the oregano. This is flat leaf parsley. I really love the fresh bite that this will give to the sauce. You can add more when you're actually eating it, but I go ahead because again, it's ready. When my tomatoes are ready, I add it in at the beginning of the sauce, and then I will can it, and then if I want to add more when I'm ready to serve later in the year, I can do that. So add some tomatoes in. Little ones can go in whole. And you know what, let's go ahead and go a little wild. Now, we can add in our black pepper. This is to taste. I have about a teaspoon in here because again, 33 pounds of tomatoes. Black pepper. Again, just making the tomatoes so that they don't choke up the little blades of your blender. But if you have ever blanched and attempted to peel tomatoes, you should be celebrating along with me how much less work this is to use the blender than it is to process tomatoes where you blanch, peel, and then run through a food mill or strainer. Yeah. And I was just blown away by the fact that the good stuff was in the part that you're throwing away. Ah, that's no good. All right, here we go. Okay, and the order that you add your spices and your herbs, it doesn't matter when you're doing this. You could add a little bit of each with each batch of tomatoes. I do recommend spreading them out through the tomatoes because they do chop up better when they have the liquid which comes from the tomatoes. But the flavor of them, it doesn't matter the order because they're gonna cook for at least an hour in the pot, so they'll mix together that way. All right, so here, this one is optional. I add rosemary to my sauce. Some people are sensitive to it and can't eat it. I like the flavor of it. If you do tolerate it, it is good for you. Anything in the pine needle family, there's definite health benefits to it. And I really like rosemary. So in it goes, and once you blend it, it doesn't, stick in your teeth as much as it does normally. All right, so we got rosemary. Oh, I got a spot in this one that I must cut out. There we go. The ick is gone. Okay, so my last little, well, let me get this blender run going. My last little herb addition does not go through the blender. Those are bay leaves, and they just go into the pot and they simmer and cook along with the tomato sauce. Now, I pull them out as I see them when I'm canning, but if I don't see them, I've simply alerted my kids to not eat the bay leaves. And it only takes them once, they don't like the flavor. But bay leaves themselves do infuse a really nice flavor to your sauce. And interestingly, it's not just Italian cooking that uses them. So, they do have a purpose. Let's get this tomato in. I'm gonna go ahead and put so for this 33 pounds, it doesn't take many. I have 2 good sized bay leaves and then 2 small ones, and it'll be enough to enhance the flavor. Let's see. As I drop things on myself. That's why I have to wear an apron, right? Ah, and I still managed to get it not on my apron. Go me. Alright, so do you see the little tiny chunks? I want to avoid those, and that is why I take the blender speed higher. I only had it at about 50% speed, which on this one is around between a 5 and a 6. So I'm going to take it higher, and the goal is to get rid of the visible specks from the sauce. So here we go. Much better. Much, much, much better. Now, I'm going to go ahead and keep going with processing my tomatoes. I have added all of my herbs. I do not salt my sauce, so if you do salt it, I would salt it at the point when you can it. And if you do choose to can it with 33 pounds of tomatoes, I do recommend canning it because otherwise it'll fill your fridge. You would add lemon juice or citric acid, but that is done at the point when we actually can it, and that is to influence the acidity and make it more shelf stable. But I will talk about that on the actual canning video. So after we finish adding the tomatoes, we're gonna put this pot on the oven and cook it for quite a while. I judge how long I cook it based on how much it reduces, and it does fluctuate from day to day because your air conditions can influence it, but it's at least an hour, so you need to allow yourself a little bit of time for this particular project. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and, well, actually we're going to put it on the burner and get it cooking, and then after that, once you get to either marinara level consistency or pizza sauce consistency, then we go ahead and can it. And that is when we get it ready for long-term storage. You can freeze this sauce, but really it preserves better in a jar with the canning process. You have an option of water bath canning or pressure canning. Because I'm adding the herbs and spices to it, I prefer pressure canning, which does not depend as much on acidity for killing bacteria and making it shelf stable, because you're taking it to a higher temperature. Some people do not like to pressure can whole tomatoes because it's a little bit hard on them because it is so much hotter, because you're using the increased pressure to increase the temperature and thus kill bacteria. However, since we're making this a sauce and we have cooked it so much beforehand, I find pressure canning does not impact the final process at all and is in fact less time consuming, and I have a much better success rate with my seals taking when I pressure can it versus water bath with this particular type of product. So that is what I will show you because it is what I've tested and found to be most successful. So for the next part, the long-term storage, you will need a pressure canner as well as some jars, lids, and rings. But for right now, we'll keep going with just the sauce creation. Again, I will just finish up this sauce and I will see you on the next round when we get this going with the cooking. But again, this is a great way to use odds and end tomatoes. You notice that I did not need all one variety of tomatoes because each one adds something different to the sauce anyway. I've read plenty of cooking books and blogs and all that stuff where people actually look for different varieties of tomatoes to add different things to their sauce. Some people do add an extra step at this point where they would roast the tomatoes, and yes, it does change the flavor a little bit. For my basic sauce, when I'm in the height of summer, my goal is just to get it into the jars and preserved, but it is a fun step when I have more time. Okay, bad spot, getting rid of it. But look at, for 33 pounds of tomatoes, that's how much I'm not using. Well, okay, once I'm done with this pile, but let's see. Whereas if I were peeling and coring each of these tomatoes, it would be significantly more. At this point, the only part I'm going to be giving up during the cooking process is the water. So I'll be able to retain all of the nutrition and the flavor and just store, you know, the good stuff. And the reason why I cook it down even farther for pizza sauce is that's how you get basically that sauce that you can see, that deep red. I think I may have two blender batches left. So let's just keep going with this. Slowly but surely, the pot is filling. But here, let me tilt this. See how liquid that is? Tomatoes have a lot of water. So I'm gonna grab these. I'm actually gonna, ooh, this is a really ripe tomato. One second, I'm gonna pull the towel towards myself. I keep a lot of my less beautiful towels and use them for cooking projects like this. Obviously, washing them in very hot water in between bouts. But you'll find they're very, very helpful in the kitchen. Ooh, ugly spot. Very helpful in the kitchen. But I don't want to use my good bath towels because sometimes the food can leave a stain. All right, here we go. Almost to the finish line. All right, so this is a deep sunburn spot. You see that split? No bugs or anything got in there that I could tell, but it is deep enough that it would leave a hard spot. So I'm gonna go ahead and just cut that little bit out. And there we go. Look, see that? So I just got rid of one spot, and look how pretty that tomato is. It's gonna make good sauce. Yeah, I'll get rid of that little spot too. Sometimes these big tomatoes split a little bit at the bottom and it leaves a hard spot. Again, it's not bad, but it is a hard spot, so we'll get rid of that. And we'll get some of these cherry tomatoes. You no longer need to be afraid of cherry tomatoes. If you have a neighbor that says, oh, I have all these cherry tomatoes and I just don't want to do anything with them, you can say, oh, I'll take them. We'll have cherry tomato spaghetti. I don't think it tastes any different, but it sure is easy to pop them in the blender and make a sauce. There we go. And like I said, you're not losing the important parts of the nutrition by cooking it, which is different than a lot of the other fruits and vegetables. So this is a good one. It's a great candidate for canning. Here we go. Yeah. This may not be the super old-fashioned traditional way to make sauce, but I bet had they had access to the type of blenders that we do today, the old cooks and chefs that developed these methods for cooking and making the sauce, I bet they would have made sauce this way, and they'd been like, what? We can make our sauce like this and not have chunks and not lose all the tomato? We are in. At least that's what I'm telling myself. But I have to think they were smart, practical people that would have liked this. So that is what we are gonna do. Oh, I was wrong. It's gonna be 3 blender batches. Dang it. There we go. But it is going quickly. Here we go. Sometimes the Roma tomatoes get that little spot. Occasionally you have to throw out the whole tomato, but when it's just that tiny, you can just kind of pop out the tip of the tomato. And you're back in business. Yeah, that was good. And, oh, look at this one. This one grew all sorts of strange, but it's all edible. No bad spots on that. It's just kind of funny looking. Yeah. Oh, look. Okay, so half the tomato didn't quite grow. It wanted to have a whole nother half right there, but that didn't happen. So look, that's what we ended up with. Cool. Another with the tip rot. There we go. And we will have one more round after this in the blender. Alright, so we are almost to the part that is going to make your kitchen smell fantastic. The smell of marinara simmering is so... Oh look, that's an entire ugly bottom. It wanted to be a really big tomato, but it just didn't quite happen. I still use part of it. Not the best tomato candidate, but we'll still use it. Here we go. No! What did I do? I accidentally threw it in the wrong one. Slide spoon. Oh, did you see it? I just saw it. Oh, is that it? No, that's a bay leaf. Dang it. Let me throw it in a whole tomato. Well, it won't hurt anything, but I don't necessarily want a giant chunk of tomato in my sauce. Now, as it cooks, you see how light this puree looks right now? It's partially aerated from being in the blender. That tomato is going to surface eventually. Let's just wrap this up. It's aerated and lighter colored now. It will get darker as it cooks, and it gets more concentrated, which will make the color go deeper. Oh, we are almost there. All right, I'm gonna cut off that top part. You can see the tomato is not bad, but it's a little bit hard, so I don't really want that in the sauce. See, a little better. Small one, and then one final big old honkin' tomato. And this one's really ripe. It's very soft. And there we go. Okay, last blender batch going in. You're going to want to know which one is your largest burner. Oh, and look at that. Did I miss a tomato? Okay, here we go. Look, 33 pounds took us right about to that point that I was hoping for. Excellent. There we go. Still not seeing that little tomato is still hiding from me. It'll show up at some point. Okay, I'm gonna carefully be thankful I went to the gym and carry my tomatoes over, find one of my big burners, make some room because this is a really big pot. I do not want the lid on it because we're gonna boil it uncovered. Now this is a canning pot behind it. You can see how big this pot is because this is a big canning pot. The canner is actually ready for later in the process. You don't have to do that, but that's what I do. I'm gonna turn my fan on, my exhaust fan, because I'm using gas. And let's get this fired up. I'm gonna put it on medium high. I want this stuff to heat up. I'm gonna keep my slotted spoon handy and a jar to put it in. Move that lid out of the way. And bring this to a boil. You're gonna have to keep an eye on it because remember what, you can see the foam now. This isn't even hot. So once it gets hot, it's gonna get very foamy and stirring will help bring down the foam. And you're gonna want, you're gonna wanna cook this sauce down. Now, for marinara sauce, I'm gonna get this down to around 14 quarts, which is a little bit over half of this pot. This is a 24 pot. It's a 24 quart pot. So a little bit over half is where I'm gonna need it for 14 quarts. So I cook it down to that point. Like you start with a lot and then reduce it. Now to get to pizza sauce, I would say, oh, that's marinara level. I want it even thicker. So we're gonna take it down to about a third of the pot. It does take a long time to do that. So I'm gonna check back in with you when it gets to what I consider to be marinara level, and then we'll take it from there. But this is my basic Italian tomato sauce. That is what I do to take them from, garden picked or farm stand picked and get them ready for processing. Excellent. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know how it goes.